Hey guys, and welcome to my fourth C++ introduction to C++, that is, video. Today we're going to be talking about structs and briefly touching on pointers. So what structs are they're basically ways to, they're basically just structures, honestly. They're ways to hold information, to hold data. So for example, as I'll do right here in a second, I'll be creating a struct, and I'll show you how the struct can hold information pertaining to particular variables within that struct. And I'll show you what that means even more in about a second. First, let's talk about int main. Actually, no, let's just jump straight into the struct. Okay, so struct produce. Let's say you're working at a grocery store and you need to keep track of things like the weight of the produce and the price of the produce, right? Okay, let's keep it simple like that. Int weight double price. Okay, and then int freeze terminal, cint freeze terminal. That's in order to keep the terminal open once we run the program. So what I'm doing now on line 17 is I'm creating a struct object called apple. So apple is now a type of produce. So what we can do with apple is we can add weight to apple, we can add price to apple, we can add just about anything that we put into the struct for produce. We can associate that with apple. Later we'll get into changing the apple object's weight and price by passing it in through a function, and that's when we'll get into pointers. Alright, so here I'm declaring the apple weight to be 5. And then I'm going to go ahead and declare that the apple price should be, doesn't really matter what it should be, honestly. Okay, so instead of that, actually, let me think about this. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you guys what's going to happen. So let's just take a moment and let's take a brief pause and let's look at what's happening here. So what's happening here is on line 9 through 12, we've created a struct called produce, and inside that struct it houses two variables, weight and price. Now inside the main function we have our variable freeze terminal, which we all know what that does. And then we get to produce apple. So apple is an object of the struct produce. So I'm able to write apple.weight, which basically means, hey, for this object, set its weight, which is not associated rather, but mentioned and declared on line 10. The weight of produce can be set. So that's what I'm doing on line 18, is I'm setting the weight of the apple to be 5. On line 19, I'm going to be printing out the weight of the apple to show you just exactly, you know what, why don't you hold on, I have something good in store. So line 19 is still a printout. So now what we're going to do is we're going to develop a function. And you know what this function is going to do is it's going to be able to take in, pause this for a moment, it's going to be able to take in all these highlighted, basically any produce object, and it's going to be able to set the weight for that produce object. Instead of passing it in by value, what we'll be doing is passing it in by reference. in this function set weight that we have yet to define, and we'll get more into that. So if I was to pass in, let's say I had set weight, and then I just took in an integer, and then I just passed in apple. So let's try that. I'm going to pass in apple, and I'm going to pass in some integer. So basically, apple's the object that I want to make a change to, and 35 is the weight I want to change it to. Now, before, well, first let's define the function. Okay, so set weight, we can go ahead and make that a void function. If I can ever find my keys. Okay, so set weight is going to be a void function because it need not return anything. It just needs to affect the struct object, in this case apple. Okay, so as you can see, I'm defining it as void set weight, take in object type produce, or struct type produce, we're going to call it apple, and an int w for the weight, and we're going to do apple.weight equals w. Now, before we go any further, I suggest you pause the video, and well, the answer's already up there, so I might as well explain to you why. Okay, so if you want, you can pause the video and figure out why this weight prints out as 5 both times. You see, the first time it's 5, and then see that comes out on line 24 when we've just set it to 5, and then we call our function set weight on apple, on the object apple, and we want to set it to 35. We go up to 15, passed in the apple, passed in the weight, set apple.weight is equal to w, which in this case is 35. Now, next thing that happened was on line 26, we printed out the weight, and we assumed that maybe, we assumed, that it would be 35 now. Now, the reason it's not 35 is because what we did with set weight was we passed in produce apple by value. Basically, what that means is we're not actually affecting any change to the object apple that we've defined down in the main function. No. Instead, we are creating a sort of, I believe it's called a shallow copy of apple. And what we're doing with that shallow copy of apple is, since it's just a copy, it in itself is a whole nother thing. So, for instance, if after on line 16, after I defined apple.weight equal to w, that apple that I passed in, that apple object, the one that I'm currently working with in that function, if I was to go to the end of line 16, hit enter, and write cout apple.weight, it would print out 35. Now, the reason that we get 2 5s here is because, like I said earlier, we are passing by value and not passing by reference. Okay, so we can get a little bit more into that. So let's, why don't you pause the video and see if you can figure out how to solve this problem such that the apple object in main, its weight will be changed by this function set weight. You can do whatever you want to do with this function. Just make sure that When we get to 26, it's cout's 35 instead of 5. So, okay. Alright, now we're back. Hopefully you guys got it right. If not, I'm here to help you guys explain. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to realize, like, look, okay, what I'm highlighting right there is I'm highlighting Apple, the object. So that object is associated with those variables inside that struct, and it's defined below in int main. So the thing is, when it's defined below in int main, and if I try to pass it into a function, the function has no idea where that Apple object exists in memory, which is why it creates a shallow copy of it, and in fact only affects the Apple that we pass in because it's a copy. So what we need to do is we need to invoke pointers into this. Now, pointers are great because what pointers allow us to do, I'm going to pause the video for a second. So what pointers are going to allow us to do here is they're going to allow us to dereference the memory location of the object. And basically what that means is we're going to be able to tell our function, hey, this apple that I define on line 22 exists in this position in memory. Therefore, when you get it, I want you to take its address associated with it and effect change at that address. Instead of creating a shallow copy, I want a deep copy. Okay, now let's continue. So, any guesses what we might do here? Anybody? I'm sure some of you have already got it figured it out. I've already figured it out. So what we're going to need to do is we are going to need to just dereference Apple in the setWeight function. Okay? So what we're going to do is, instead of taking in Apple, which is just, instead of just taking in, Apple, the object, the produce object Apple, we need to take in the reference to its location in memory. And we're going to do that by placing an ampersand in front of the produce Apple. So if I could just speed this up here a little bit. Okay, so not this produce Apple on line 15. We do not need an ampersand in front of that. What we need for that is a pointer. So what that means is that what we're going to be getting is a pointer to this Apple object that is of struct type produce, which is going to give us a deep copy and is going to allow us to affect the memory that resides within the Apple object that we defined in main on line 22. Right there on line 22. So now, as you can see, setWeight is having some problems. It says no suitable conversion function from produce to produce pointer exists. So, well, there's an easy way to solve that. What it's looking for, what setWeight is looking for, is it's looking for an address. So we're gonna dereference. We're gonna do something called dereferencing an object. So to dereference an object, you simply put an ampersand in front of the object, and that will dereference it and just make it purely its memory location. Okay, in this case, it's located on the stack. So now we've got our set weight pointer set up, and the next thing we notice is, okay, look, it's tripping out about the period on line 16, and the reason that's the case is because, so the way I like to think about this and remember this is, when I'm working with pointers and I want to change something associated with a pointer that I'm given as a parameter, I always remember I need to point to it instead of a dot. Point to it, literally. Point to it. And bam, there you go. So now it's saying, okay, that's fine. I'm going to be taking in a pointer to this Apple object, and I'm going to be setting that Apple objects, that specific Apple object, which is the one we defined on line 22. I'm going to be setting that specific Apple object's weight to whatever we pass in as W. Okay. Next thing we need to solve is the problem on line 25. Now, the problem with line 25 is, as I mentioned earlier, it is not dereferenced. So that's the reason why it's giving us an error of sorts. It's telling us, yeah, you can't just pass in a regular object to a pointer, you have to dereference it so the pointer can work with its location in memory. So dereferencing basically just spits out its location in memory, and then the pointer takes that in and it says, okay, I'm going to basically reverse dereference that, and now I have the actual apple that we defined on line 22, and I can work with that apple. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to place an ampersand in front of apple right here in set weight. Place an ampersand in front of it, and what that's going to do is that's going to dereference that object, allowing it so that the pointer can figure out where it is in memory and make changes to its internal weight. So now if we run this again, speed this up a bit. Okay, here we go, building up. Alright, see, as you can see now, it is now 5. Pause it real quick. So before it was 5 and 5, but now it is 5 and 35. And the reason that this is the case is because, well, hopefully you've been paying attention, we passed in a pointer to the Apple object defined on line 22, or rather, declared on line 22. We passed in a pointer to that, which says, hey, take this Apple object's address, right, and take this integer W, and then whatever that Apple object's pointing to in terms of weight, set it equal to W. So we're literally right in there with the memory. You can think about it like that. We're right in there with the memory. We're going to be changing it basically down to its core. Okay? And that's what happened here. We changed it down to its core. First we passed in a pointer. We passed it as a pointer. We pointed and said, hey, this Apple object, the weight associated with it, the weight pointing to this Apple object is now going to be equal to W. So the first print will print out 5, obviously, and then once we call set weight, it's going to print out, And once we call set weight, it's going to change the value of the apple. It's going to change the value of the weight of the apple that we defined on, or declared on line 22. It's going to change that to 35 because we're now working with pointers and dereferencing. So yeah, pointers are extremely important, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more. Thanks.